Good morning. Sounds like Cass Tech is in the building. That was pretty good. If they would have asked Roz what was her favorite restaurant, she would have said Central Kitchen and Bar, so as a FYI. Thank you for joining this session and this very important discussion that we're going to have. But before we start, we're going to do a little exercise for those in the room and those watching. If you are a white male, raise your hand. Okay. Checking all y'all. You're white males. I'm going to tell 4 brief stories that is going to end up bringing that home. The first is last week, the business leaders of Michigan invited me to participate in a panel discussion. It was Bill Picard, Joe Anderson, and John Ricolta. And one of the questions that was asked, given to me to ask, so I can't take credit for it, was to inquire about something that has happened in their lives, in business or in their personal lives, that made them say, wow. Joe Anderson said a couple things. Joe Anderson said, every morning to this day, now mind you, Joe Anderson has created several billion-dollar businesses, has spun them off, very successful. He says, every morning I wake up realizing that I'm a black man. And I'm pretty sure that the white males in the room that raise your hand, you don't do that in the morning. You don't get up and say, yeah, I'm a white cat. You don't do that when you wake up in the morning. The other thing Joe Anderson said, which is, Mom, why I have on blue jeans, is that he has never, he's 70-something years old, he has never worn blue jeans out of his house because he is concerned about how white American will look at him differently because of how he's dressed. The white males in this room, you don't worry about that. I said, Bill Picard, Dr. Bill Picard, author, philanthropist. I said, Doc, what's happened to you? He says, well, actually, recently, I took my daughter, Bill's also in his 70s. He says, I took my daughter to dinner, and we pull up, he's got an Escalade, pull up, it's a very nice restaurant, and the guy comes around to his door, Pick is now outside of the car, and he thinks Dr. Bill Picard is the Uber driver. That doesn't happen to y'all. When my father was on the Michigan Supreme Court, excuse me. When my father was on the Michigan Supreme Court, one of the justices died. There was a funeral, there was the event. I had no idea this was going to happen. Sorry. The repast was at the justice's house. I believe he lived in Grosse Pointe. My father, in his suit, in his dress shoes, which I used to polish as a kid, and a cashmere coat, asked the now widow, can you give me a shovel? It was snowing. Guy pulls up, and he throws my dad the keys because he thinks my dad's a valet. If it was me, as my friends know, I would have had a whole different approach to this white guy who threw me the keys. However, being the dignified jurist that my father is, he walked up to him and said, hi, I'm Dennis Archer, Michigan Supreme Court. These are real stories. I don't know if Suzanne's in the room. Suzanne took Harold Ford to New York when Harold was running for Senate. Last story, not an emotional one. Suzanne took Harold to New York to go visit with a big investment bank. And they got off the elevator, walked to the reception desk. This is Suzanne Shank, big Wall Street, big shot, Harold Ford all over the news, a congressperson. They walk up, and the receptionist directs them to the uniforms for the caterer and tells them, where they're preparing the food for the breakfast. Mind you, the breakfast is for Harold. This stuff, I can't make this stuff up. It's ridiculous stuff. But let me say the following. We have an opportunity. The George Floyd murder, the attention that was paid and we are paying now to the inequities and discrepancies that we see in healthcare and the economy as a result of COVID, provide us with an opportunity to make a change. Businesses are all saying the right things now, and it does now feel different. And we stand to gain. Research indicates that by 2050, there's a $92 billion economic gain to be had if we embrace diversity and close the racial gap. DEI comes into vogue from time to time and is in the public consciousness, and it fades. But we are tired of hearing about change and not seeing change. We are tired of lip service. Change is coming. My father has been talking about the social demographers, who I'd never heard that term before until he started using it decades ago. They will tell you that the U.S. will be minority white by 2045. So, quite simply, we got to act now, as Ms. Brewer indicated. At the Chamber, we are putting our money and our time and our effort where our mouths are. We have started the Racial Justice and Economic Equality Task Force, of which I am now a chair. We have 4 pillars of focus: an internal focus, which we have to do first, supporting others, expanding programs in our communications, and developing, leading, and creating. Pillar 1, internal focus. Quite simply, we cannot and will not throw a stone in a glass house. We have to lead by example. So internally, we are looking at our board composition continuously. We are looking at our supplier diversity efforts. And we are looking at hiring and retaining people of color. Second focus is supporting others. There are a lot of organizations in the community doing great work. One of the things that was very important to our committee and to Sandy was to ensure that we're not swimming in somebody's lane unnecessarily, and that we use the heft of the chamber to support people doing great work. Carla Walker-Miller and her team at Detroit Means Business is just an example of that work. Expanding our programs and our committees, the Neighborhood Hub, the Detroit Promise, you're familiar, Leadership Detroit, the CEO Coalition for Change are just a few examples of those programs that we will continue to operate with excellence. Developing, leading, and creating. We will talk a little bit later, particularly with Matt Elliott, about the Gallup initiative that Sandy brought to us as a board and we're embracing. Establishing community leaders and a roundtable, new business programming, lead a local advocacy agenda for small business, something that I'm sure Carla Walker-Miller will touch on shortly. And then, of course, establishing an Office of Racial Justice and Economic Equality. It's interesting, if you look at an historical perspective, I saw a video that a client sent me, Marissa, and it was Byron Allen talking about his efforts in trying to get more advertising dollars for African-American media companies. But in the video, he had explained he had become very close to Coretta Scott King. And she said she shared with him one day that, most people think that those that were opposed or thought differently than my husband were most put off by his I Have a Dream speech. She said, it's not the case. what really stirred the pot was his To America speech. And in that speech, he talks about economic opportunity and the need for parity, which a lot of people believe that Dr. King was only about civil rights. He was equally about economic rights. And she said to Byron, basically, if we don't get this together, it's going to be the demise of the country. We can't afford to see that happen. The commitment to equity and inclusion has been on a wave since the Reconstruction period. There was perhaps more effort in those 10 years following the Civil War than we've seen in any other 10-year period, save maybe the 60s. Our country's credibility is at stake. I mean, people are looking at us all over the world at how we're addressing this issue. There is going to be an immense cost if we settle again for the status quo. But an historic moment brings historic opportunity. So I want to ask all of you, what are you going to do? Now, I got some suggestions for you. One, accountability. Be willing to be held accountable and hold others accountable. And that's just not in business, that's in your personal life. If you hear a snide comment, say something about it. If you see something happening in the workplace, say something about it. Make commitments to your team and those in your lives around this issue and be held accountable for what you say. Open the door for others. A lot of the problem for women, other people of color, and black folk is often we're not in the rooms where decisions are being made. We're not in the foursome on the golf course. We're not on the fishing trip. Go out of your way to bring somebody else in the room. And for the black folks that are in the rooms, don't be the only one in the room. If you're a woman and you're in the room, bring another woman into the room. Lastly, be open to being uncomfortable. These are uncomfortable conversations, but it's only if we have a true and honest dialogue will we make a difference. And I'll just end with this. For those of you who saw Harold Ford's panel yesterday, John Tuttle, he said it in a simple fashion that resonated with me, and I don't think that I could do any better, so I will quote him. He said, if you are not discussing diversity and implementing diverse strategies, you're going out of business. That's the reality that we live in today. Thank you for having me, and now I think I'm going to be joined by a fantastic panel.
As our first speaker on stage, please welcome Vice President of Airport Operations at DTW for Delta Airlines, Hussein Berry, President of Bank of America, Michigan, Matt Elliott, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Walker Miller Energy Services, Carla Walker Miller.
So, did you guys raise your hands when you were back? Well, maybe not. Did you raise your hand when you were in the back? All right, to make sure. I'm trying to count all y'all in the room. Interesting. So what are you all doing in your organizations to address this? And you've got a great background because, I don't know, the app that they give us for the conference is phenomenal. I don't know how many of you really go look at the bios. But if you look at Hussein's bio, you will realize that Hussein started as the guy on the curb, right, helping with the bags. And you've risen to this position, which I'm sure you had your own set of challenges. And so we'll start with you and talk about Delta. Large organization, lots of career opportunities, top to bottom, demographically diverse in terms of not just globally, but throughout the United States, hundreds of thousands of employees. What are you guys doing as a result of what is happening in the country?
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you for pointing that out. Having grown up in the Detroit metro area in a heavily populated Arab American and Muslim community, and working at the airport prior to and a post 9/11 world, and trying to advance your career in that world was an interesting one, of course. And we were just talking about that earlier, and that component of growing up around here. I think one of the things that stood out for me back then is how well my company put their arms around me to shield me from this idea that, you know, we were all terrorists at the time. And that went a long way for me. And so as you go on and you live in the airline industry and the travel industry, you think that you are behaving in a way that's inclusive and we're making a lot of ground. And frankly, we felt that we did, and we were doing really well at it. To your point from earlier, when the George Floyd incident happened, we had to take a deep look. It was an inflection point for us, as it is for many companies out there, right? You had mentioned that companies are doing and saying all the right things right now. I think the biggest thing for us was to be transparent, to kind of live it and understand what uncomfortable conversations were like. I mean, before the George Floyd came to light, before the whole pandemic thing came to light, we were already introducing things like uncomfortable conversations and being open and talk about things that have been taboo, like politics and sexual orientation and whatnot. But the level of looking at our component of diversity and looking within our diversity lineup and where the opportunities are have been eye-opening for all of us. And it's been eye-opening from the top all the way through the entire organization. So, you know, to list out, you know, everything that we're doing, there's a lot going on. But I think the most important thing is that we're open and transparent and we're being bold about it. And, you know, not to insinuate anybody's being obsessive over watching Delta in the media, but Ed has put himself out there, right? On the pandemic front, on the racial injustice front, you know, and the most recent thing that you can probably say, wow, you know, in terms of his participation in this world is the voting rights in Georgia and the position we took from that standpoint. So I think it's important for us, and not that we're experts in politics by any stretch, but it's been really important for us to represent our customers, represent our employees, represent the community in all the right ways. And so the work just started. There's a long way to go by any stretch, but I couldn't be more proud of Delta and all the work we're doing, especially coming from a diverse background myself.
Matt, your situation is interesting because being a bank, you guys are running a very large institution. You also have a national footprint. You also have hundreds of thousands of employees. But, you know, the external piece is elevated for you guys because you guys are lending out money, you're having banking relationships. And, you know, what happened with COVID and the CARES Act and the PPP money and how that was initially distributed shined an additional light, not a new light, but re-shine the light, I should say, as it relates to economic inequality and the disparate number of particularly African-American businesses that in that first round did not get any dough. And it's because they didn't have banking relationships. They may have gone into the bank to make a deposit, but they don't know the branch manager. They certainly don't know a vice president. And so, you know, the banks, when they're going to put out the money, they're looking at their customers. And so two questions for you. One is, what are you doing internally as relates to that? But two, what are you, as one of the premier banking institutions in the country, doing to right those particular wrongs?
A lot in there, but you're all true in the sense that we realized in the immediate aftermath, especially of George Floyd, that we can do more, you know? And so the first thing for us is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of our business strategy. You know, we really feel like in order to be a great organization, we have to be a great place to work. And part of that means you can bring your whole self to work, you know? And so we really started doing more listening. We have a concept called courageous conversations. And, you know, we were able to have more and still do have more than we ever did before. And because when you get a chance to hear somebody's lived experience, and it's real for you too, you know, then nobody's a label. Their experience is part of you as well. And that's been a key part of our strategy, is to drive that out and make sure that we're listening first and that people are heard. That's internal. And then external, we realize that there are these systemic barriers to economic mobility. So we came up with what was then a $1 billion, now $1.25 billion commitment to driving out and improving and breaking down some of these barriers to economic mobility in communities of color. So we think about health, we think about small business, we think about jobs, and these sorts of things really help us, we think, drive over a period of time some catalytic change. So the idea is that we make an investment here that attracts more money, and then the thing starts to build on itself. So to put it specifically in Detroit, an example would be our investment in First Independence Bank. So we make an equity investment and a large deposit in First Independence Bank. That helps Ken Kelly and his team further their mission. So we're making lots of investments like that all over the country. And of course, Tiffany Douglas and I are doing our best to bring that money here to Detroit. Hopefully we get more than our fair share. But those are two of the basic things that we're doing. But I think it's really critical for all of us as leaders and all of us as people to really be clear on our why. And diversity and inclusion is a big part of how we run the company. And it starts at the top. Our CEO chairs our Diversity and Inclusion Council. So it's something that we're held accountable for and we all believe in.
Carla, you, I'm sure at some points have felt like a Lone Ranger. Prior to the occurrences of the last couple of years, you were steadfast as we sat in our board meetings, bringing up issues in this regard. So for that, I thank you. What would be your suggestion as a middle market, Black female-owned business to these two leaders in terms of, from your perspective, what would you like to see them do?
One of our dear friends, Marlo Stoudemire, used to talk a lot about social capital. He was a social capital expert. And I think that we know so many things that small businesses need, that Black people need, but what we need more than anything else is we need powerful men who are, they're still the power center of business and of this country, to lend their social capital, their social equity, to be courageous enough to talk to other powerful men, because this is how change really is made. And a lot of times when we think of courageous conversations, we think of conversations between Black people and white people, or Black people and people of Arab descent. But the most courageous conversations will be between men in power, that you are willing to have those conversations with people that you know are not quite right, people who are blocking that sister from your board, if you even have a Black woman on your board, people who are concerned that they're going to be less comfortable if they let someone different in. And you all know those people. You know who those people are. And you are the evangelists. You are the ones that can say, get it or get out. And it should be just that clear. I like to quote myself, and one of my favorite quotes, I do. No, I used to quote everybody else, and I still do sometimes, but I make up some good stuff. So my favorite quote right now, because I'm in sustainability, is courage is a renewable resource. And we all have days where we don't behave as courageously as we'd like to, and we go home and it's like, wow, I should have said this or I should have done that. And I feel like there are a lot of people who are shoulda people. When I was speaking up in those chamber board meetings, Dennis, I am a hypersensitive introvert by nature who has learned to operate for long periods of time as an extrovert. But I literally had to train myself to take 2 deep breaths and say something that I knew at least 50% of the people in that room were not going to appreciate. And I would count and see how long it took for some of the guys' heads to slightly go up, like, here she is again. But those conversations were important. And the reason it's important to have more than one Black woman is I didn't get to talk about the business of the chamber because I always had the assignment and the burden of pointing out, what the inequities or the issues. So by the time I did that, I didn't get to say, I didn't get to engage the way other people were engaging. And when I say a burden, let me tell you, a platform is a blessing. I thank God every day for the blessing of a platform and pray that I will use it the way He wants me to do. So I don't want to sound like it is a burden. I'm invited into some rooms now that I swear to God I didn't know existed a year ago, 2 years ago. But once we are there, we have to be the voice of the people who are missing. We have to be the voice of the voiceless.
Carla, so I talked earlier about opening the doors and not being the only one in the room, and you mentioned boards. Talk about the importance of having women, black women, on corporate boards.
If I have to talk to anyone in this room about the importance of women on boards, I mean, if you have a mother, a sister, a daughter, or a female relative, you know they enlighten you in so many ways in your personal life. But, and the same is true on boards. We do think differently. In some ways, I feel that the business psyche has caught up to who women are and who black women are, because we are caretakers, we're protectors, we're people who want everyone to win. And if you are missing that, you really are missing something. You know, sometimes I get a call from one of my girlfriends, a large company has made like a ridiculous mistake. And we'll say, yeah, you can tell they don't have any black people on their board, or you can tell they don't have any black people in their C-suite or in their decision making, because they would never, some sister would have been saying, I don't think so. So, I mean, it is absolutely important. But the other thing I want to say about boards, though, is, you know, we're all, I shouldn't say we all, I am blessed to have gotten a couple of calls about being on publicly traded or private company boards. And one of the things I'll say about the women who are not getting those calls is everyone who wants diversity, if you want a woman, a black woman in particular, on your board, you would have one. And the only thing missing is the will. The business case has been made over and over. The business case was actually made decades ago. So if you don't have one or two or three, because it should be a percentage of your board, then you really should be looking at each other as C-suite executives and as board members, because you are not getting the best or giving the best value to your shareholders because you're missing something. The last thing I'll say is, people act like finding a talented black woman is like finding a Siberian white tiger in Detroit. If you want, you can ask anybody. There are probably 50, 100 black women here. And for white guys, for generations, the entry point has been that you were someone's roommate or you played golf with someone. So why is it different for black women? You should be talented, you should be capable, you should have integrity, you should be a good person, you should be smart as hell. And that describes a lot of people. So use the same rules for black women that you use for everyone else.
You know, you mentioned shareholders. Your two companies are publicly traded. You have boards, you have millions of shareholders, some individual, some institutions, and you both are retail facing, millions of customers. So talk to us about internally, to the extent you can, kind of what the decision process was like as you balance doing what you think is right, but also worrying about any backlash from customers, investors, et cetera.
Oh, sir.
Yep. So if you rewind a little bit, another very public decision we made after the Parkland shooting in the NRA, and where we ended up there in terms of the Georgia legislature at the time, was a very costly ordeal for us. And so these things that we encounter publicly, politically, internally within our employees that we encounter are tough. They're tough decisions to take on. And in the realm of DE&I, it's important that, and I had mentioned earlier, you know, when you're trying to make decisions for your company that is reflective of what the employee needs are and the needs of our customers, you're going to hear the backlash. And we've heard it. We've heard it on several fronts. And but it doesn't mean you don't take them. Right? Where we stood on the voting rights in Georgia was a pretty big deal to us, to the point where we just gave medical benefits because of the systemic issues that exist in our communities to a part-time workforce that traditionally has not had benefits. And we knew that that time needed to come, and the best time to make those decisions. The advantage a lot of our employees, they're struggling to make it in the workforce. They're struggling to get other means of health benefits outside of Delta in their personal lives. Made it really important not just to reach them on a professional and a workforce level, but to also try to reach them external, because there are struggles. They're underrepresented no matter where they go. And we needed to make those positive changes for us. And so the backlash that you're going to get from the community has to be weighed with every decision, with every evaluation, on a bipartisan basis. And it hasn't been easy for any of us by any stretch. But it's a critical role that we're all going to play. And when you make those very public commitments, and I know we talked a little bit, or you had mentioned sustainability a little earlier. When you make those commitments, there's no reversing from those commitments, right? When you said it felt different, we feel it as well, right? As a corporation, and we're very publicly making commitments. Internally, we're making commitments, and it's important that we continue down that path on every front, whether it's public and internal and external. You have to be intentional and bold. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to make it sound like we're there. But we're definitely working really hard on it, and we're taking in the noise, and we have to take it in and evaluate everyone for what it's worth and make the right decisions.
Matt?
Just to build on Hussein's point, I think for us, it's always been about being clear on our why. Why are we doing this? What's our approach? And so understanding how a commitment to diversity and inclusion fits within our own business strategy, how it's important to our shareholders and to our clients and our customers. They care about what we stand for. And so those are things that we all put in the calculus when we were making these sorts of decisions. To Carla's point, we're fortunate enough to have a diverse decision-making body. So our board of directors, for example, is 50% diverse. And frankly, I think we make better decisions as a result. We hope, but it's always a journey, so you never know. But I will say that you always do get a backlash. These are not comfortable conversations, sort of like you talked about at the beginning. And you have to be ready to answer how are you going to respond when you do get that backlash. And for me, I end up on the phone once in a while with a client who has a point of view on things. And more often than not, the vast majority of the time, once I explain our why, then the client understands it. And more often than not, we end up with a closer relationship, believe it or not, in part because we've been able to have a conversation around an uncomfortable topic. So it's a journey, but what helps us and what helps me as a leader here is being really clear on our why.
Carla, as we sit up here, 1,100 strong at this conference, we have political leaders, business leaders, philanthropic leaders. When we talk about these changes that are being made, that we want to see instituted, it's also important that it's instituted for all. And so if you look at the city of Detroit, 85+% African American. How do we ensure, in your opinion, that everyone participates, that small business participates, that students that are coming up through school are able to participate in the opportunities that we are committing to create?
Well, that's a big question, because it really depends on who the company is. But what I always say is find out who Detroiters are. Detroiters are amazing people. One of the things we did in 2018 is we instituted for our Detroit-based headquarters building, then we work and check every week, because we want 60% of our team members to be based in Detroit, because we know that there are challenges, and we are in a neighborhood. People can get to us, really, really easily, and it's part of our commitment to Detroit. Your commitment to Black companies is a commitment to Detroit. Black companies are so much more likely to hire Black people to be located, and I think, Dennis, you may have mentioned this, to be located in Black neighborhoods and to be accessible to people. Helping Black companies helps Detroit. It helps the tax base. It helps the educational. It helps people to stay in Detroit once they graduate from colleges. And again, it really does go back to that social capital. If you really get to know Detroiters, then you really would realize that that talent really is distributed equally and opportunity is not. So if you bring more opportunity, the second thing is I said something in a meeting the other day that I went to a meeting and I felt like I crashed it because number one, I wasn't invited, and number two.
So you did crash it.
I wasn't invited.
Sounds like you did.
Listen though, I wasn't invited, but I belonged there. And it was I was the only black person there. So I literally sheepishly went into, and it's one of my favorite organizations though now. It's Michigan Energy Innovators Business Council. But one thing you'll learn is there are Detroiters that won't come downtown because they don't feel welcome. They feel like they're crashing downtown, that the city really wants 23-year-old white guys in skinny jeans downtown. So we really have to bring the benefits to where the people are. We have to invite people in so they understand that they're welcome, because we all have the experience of going places and finding out that we absolutely are not welcome. And we find that out once we get there. And it's embarrassing, it's demoralizing, it's hurtful, and it stays in your spirit. Dennis, when you got emotional early, it wasn't even for you. It was a generational emotion from what your father went through. So we're carrying the emotion of what our parents and grandparents went through and still experiencing foolishness ourselves. So we are reticent to go into spaces and places where we are not welcome. So if you want black people, go to black people.
Simple. Matt, we talked earlier about the light that was reshined on access to capital, lack of banking relationships. What is Bank of America doing proactively to reach out to improve those relationships, to educate about the importance of banking relationships and not just banking? We've moved now to everyone's got their banking information on your phone. You can execute wires, you can check your accounts, you can send money to your kids. And so with the implementation of this new technology, you're less likely to have that relationship with a banker, at least a retail banker, than you would have been before. So what is the bank doing proactively to improve those relationships?
Well, basically we're taking Carla's advice and we're going where the people are. That's the easiest way to describe it. We have a really great tool that we sponsor along with Sal Khan, who's been here before, called BetterMoneyHabits.com. And that's really our financial education curriculum, and it's free to everybody. But we use that as the basis, and we use it in lots of different places and spaces. So we sponsor a program called Grow Detroit's Young Talent. And of the 1,000 or so people who go through that every summer, they get some time with BetterMoneyHabits.com. So, that starts to build, some financial experience. And then the other thing too is part of this $1.25 billion, we're really trying to think hard about how do we create and catalyze access to other forms of capital. So we peeled off a strip of $300 million and we're making investments largely in venture capital firms that are run and managed by people of color and women, and they're investing in companies owned by and founded by people of color and women. And we think that $300 million will actually catalyze several billion of value long term. So we're trying to think differently and more broadly around how we get capital, catalytic capital, into the hands of people and let them do their thing basically, because there is a lot of talent. Our teams who are doing this analysis, in which our typical investment banking teams, they're really impressed by the quality of the deal flow and really and very, very optimistic about how that investment's going to work. So those are the basics, and we're really proud of the work that we do, but it's never done. It's always a process.
There are a number of disadvantaged, mistreated folks. Today, though, today meaning during this period of time, the focus has been on black folks. And in fact, I'm sure a lot of the black folks in the room have been in discussions where you start talking about the importance of diversity, and then people start going off on all these other included parties. And it's like, hold on, it's kind of like, this is our time. Can we have our 10 minutes, please? And however, as leaders, of organizations, you do have a responsibility of both addressing that which is of the moment, which is the plight of African Americans, but also you can't neglect the other folks, the Arab Americans, the people, the GLBT community, Latino Americans. I mean, you can go down the line, those with handicaps. How do you balance, as corporate leaders, addressing the concerns, the real-time nature of what Black folks are going to, but at the same time not neglecting or be off-putting to others?
Yeah, this is I'm very quietly and privately passionate about this topic. We were just talking a little earlier about some intimate conversations that I have in my own community about where Arab Americans stand in today's world, right? Everybody wants to get on this train, as you're alluding to. And one of the things that, I've told a lot of people privately is, we got to get the largest minority group right before you get to the super smaller groups, right? And I would consider Arab Americans, a very small fraction of the total U.S. population. Granted, what's happening in the Middle East, granted, all that is happening, but when you push into the professional realm, there are white people in the organization that feel threatened, that now there's this invisible competition, there's a threat on their race, as you put a quote up on the board, that's very real. But I'll give you a small example. It's a simple one. And the theme we've been talking about is having these uncomfortable conversations. I was having a recent meeting, and the 4th of July had just come and gone. Juneteenth had just come and gone. And one of the leaders came to me and he said, hey, it was really uncomfortable posting the American flag on our internal social media. Am I getting in trouble if anybody speaks out on it? I just want to show my patriotism and my love for the U.S. and celebrating the 4th of July. And it happened in a room, well, he said that to me privately, but in a room, our HR manager was talking about Juneteenth and educating everybody in the room about what Juneteenth meant. And I paused right there and created a very uncomfortable environment by saying, hey, can we talk a little bit about what the 4th of July is to every single person in this room, whether you're white, Hispanic, Arab, Black, and quickly the room went silent. And I had to encourage and poke and prod everybody to talk a little bit about it. And the African American on my team spoke up, and it was, said it really eloquently, explained what both of those meanings meant to him, but told the white guy in the room, he was like, look, don't get it mixed up. I was barbecuing on the 4th of July. I was celebrating the 4th of July. But there's a deeper meaning, there's a deep historical meaning behind it. Symbolically, this is what it means to me, and it was a very educational moment for everybody in the room. And so it's more of that conversation. I don't know how and when those opportunities are gonna come up, but you gotta create them. And so we've been doing it for a while now. I think we're taking a different angle on it. I personally and professionally recognizing your 10 minutes is really critical right now if we're gonna get it right. And it can't be 10 minutes. There's gotta be no expiration date, and we gotta keep it going as an organization. And everybody needs to be educated on it, not just one group or another. So for what it's worth, that was an interesting story for us, a learning moment for all of us.
Matt?
It's a great question, and I think the way that we've thought about it at Bank of America is take that moment and highlight the fact that you're going to lift up your teammates' humanity, and that we all have something that makes us unique or special. And in the context of hearing stories, for example, and I've had the privilege of having a lot of folks explain to me what their real experience is like, And for me anyway, I'm never going to unhear those. Now I understand how these issues impact people I care about. And so that for me makes it a little bit easier to say, hey, listen, just because I'm asking you to lift up Dennis's voice doesn't mean you don't get a voice too. Mm-hmm. We're all at the table now. And so getting rid of or addressing just on the front of this zero-sum thinking, for me anyway, and I think for us as an organization, has helped us a lot. And it's also helped us create more allyship or advocacy to what Carla was talking about before, so that, more than ever, I've been in banking about 30 years. Only in the last year or so have I been in rooms with people who profile like me, and we're talking about our diverse colleagues with them not in the room. And I feel like as long as those conversations are occurring, not just in boardrooms either. I had one on the golf course earlier this year, which lasted the entire back nine. And as long as we're having those sorts of conversations, I think then it can be different, and that's a positive thing. But this inherent thought of zero-sum thinking really, I think, gets in the way of folks.
Carla, your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You don't have to lose for me to win. And also, if you get it right with Black people, you learn so much about everyone else, because Black people identify. We are people who live with disabilities, right? We are people who live in ethnic communities. We are people who struggle with economics. So you're not just solving the problem for Black people. The other thing is, you all know how forgiving the Black community is, right? When we get in, especially sisters, we're bringing everybody. We got the door open down. We're bringing everyone with us. So it's not, I'm in, so we're going to close the door. We really do recognize the power of inclusion, and we felt the pain of exclusion. So we're not coming in and blocking the door for anyone else.
We've got about a minute and a half left. I'll ask the two gentlemen first. What is your, to date in this regard, a single learning that you like to share with your peers, your other corporate peers, in terms of what they can do in this space? It's been a success, perhaps, so far in your company.
Yeah, it can't end. It feels very different. As we mentioned earlier, there's got to be a commitment at every level in the organization. You have to audit it. You had mentioned the word accountability. A part of putting yourself out there is within itself a natural form of accountability. You commit to statistics and commit to educations and commit to communities. In this world of hyper media and social media, you're not going to get away with much anymore, right? And so there's another inherent and natural accountability. And frankly, don't be afraid of it. You may not realize it now, but you'll eventually realize that we're doing the right thing, educating one another, having these really tough conversations. It hasn't been comfortable for any of us, frankly, but we're all learning, and we're learning fast, and we're learning quickly, and I'm super appreciative of it, and I urge everybody to keep it up 110%.
Thank you. Matt?
I think Brené Brown says this all the time, that one of the obligations of leadership is vulnerability. And if you're going to do this work correctly, I think it requires us all to be personally vulnerable, which is scary. And a lot of white men feel like there's more risk in having a discussion like this than there is reward. But frankly, we don't have an option anymore. If you want to be successful, not only personally, but also organizationally, that's part of your job. This is part of what it means to lead. Personally, it's been incredibly gratifying and hard, and you're going to make mistakes, and you just have to what's helped me anyway is build a network around me of people who will call me out on it, but still forgive, and that's been very, very helpful.
So Carla, we'll end with you appropriately. So for all the white males that raised their hand when I started, what advice do you have for them?
Do the right thing. We're really blessed, because the right thing is also the smart thing right now when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we really are looking forward to changing the world with you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.